For a long time, True Sun had felt the sickness coming on. The pain in his forehead refused to be wiped away. It was just his eyes, at first, he told himself, and came from looking too hard for word from his Indian people. All winter his eyes had stared down the road into the far hills across the river, straining for sight of a word bringer from his people. Now and then letters duly came for his white father and mother. His Indian father, he remembered, would get messages too, mostly by messenger. His white parents' letters were quickly broken apart, read, and thrown aside. His Indian father had more respect for the words somebody went through such trouble to send him. First, the messenger was received and welcomed. He was made comfortable after his long journey, and his wants supplied. Then, when all was meet and ready, perhaps in the presence of others who had been called to hear, the message was given in words and dignity, sometimes as noble as an oration. The boy knew it was a long way from the Tuscarawas to the banks of the Susquehanna, but word of mouth had been passed farther than that. There was always a way. Traders and hunters traveled back and forth. A message could even be sent by hand. The whites were not the only people able to make marks on wood or paper. He had seen his Indian father carve signs on the bark of a tree far in the woods, telling how he had shot a bear at this spot, and that if the traveler left the path toward the west, he could find a spring of water where the elk or woods horse came to drink. But winter passed, and no word for him ever came that he knew about. The first green leaves of the skaka lettuce scented the marshes. Birch buds stung the tongue, and the blossoms of the tree of the Schwannemek lay in the drifts of the mountainside like the remnants of last year's snow. Hardly dare he look at them for homesickness. But it was the call of the Mehmed Hakamo, the turtle dove, that spoke to the very center of his being. Whenever he heard its note of lonely solitude, it carried him back on swift wings to the village on the Tuscarawas. It could almost be the same bird that used to sit on the hill of the high spring and call in the early morning when the sun was breaking through the river mists. Then he could feel the bark town coming to life around him. Soon he and Half Arrow would be leaving for their day's freedom in the forest, chewing hunks of dried venison as they went. Where the river widened into a cattail swamp, their blood would race with the noisy talk of ducks, and their fingers itched for the guns denied them. They complained of lost arrows shot across the water, but their father said if they had guns, they wouldn't get the bullets back either. Other times they fished for Namaspama, the rockfish, and waded in the riffles for Makawekti, the red-bellied terrapin. Often they didn't come back until the Mehmed Hakamo called again from the hill, and the village hung wreathed in wood smoke, flavored with the scent of roasting meat and of the burning red willow tobacco. Oh, that was the life of young gods in the forest, and how could one think to live without it? All through the winter and early spring, he told himself that when Hadawaniminishi, the dogwood, bloomed, he would have some word of greeting and encouragement from his Indian father, some message to keep up his courage and to say that the time of deliverance was near. But the fragile petals fell from the shad tree. Dogwood came into broad bloom. Now the leaves of the wappenquak, the gnarled and powerful white oak, hung the tiny, pink and furry on massive branches, and still he heard nothing but on the breeze that blew most every day from the Tuscarawas. It came over him that he was dead to his Indian people, his body buried, his grave neglected, his name forgotten as the last autumn leaves that had floated down the river, never to be seen again. The worst of it was that something had happened to his unquenchable Indian soul. When first they had taken him from the Lenni Lenape, he would have fought an army for the chance of returning. But now he had stayed in the insidious company of white people too long. Their milk-warm water had got into his blood. He had become tamed, submissive as the plow horse in the field. At first he had rebelled against the hoe. He had told his white father how once as a small boy the squaws had got him to help them hoe their corn. His Indian father had sternly reproved him. He was a man-child and should never dishonor himself with the labor of women. But his white father could see no point in the story. We look at things differently here, he said. A day or two later, old Black Bejance came hobbling up the road on his two sticks. He gazed gravely over the fence at True Son and his hoe. They got the harness on you, Injun boy, he said. The straps is buckled and the single tree lugged. The boy kept on down the row. That evening his white father spoke to him in the house. It wasn't so bad, was it, Johnny? He smiled. You did tolerable well for the first time. His praise meant little to the boy, coming as it did from this man whose fondest place was his desk, his bald head bulging like a storehouse with useless figures of the land, crops, and money. He was still incomprehensible to his son, in dress and sex like a man, and yet unable to rule his own squaw, but being ruled by her, obeying her slightest wish, paying others to do her work while she slept life in her room like a sleek white rat in its cage, concerned mostly with the newspapers, books, and letters, such as white rats like to chew upon. Beside her, the memory of his Indian mother was like spreading like a sugar maple, providing them with all food and warmth, while beside this, his feeble white man at his desk, his Indian father, had been an oak sheltering them from both the heat of the sun and the fury of the thunderbolt. When they had put him to bed, his white mother, supported by his father and Aunt Kate, came to his room to read from him from the black book she said that God had given to the white people. Later, the white medicine man appeared, smelling of horses, practicing the white man's superstition of bleeding the feet and purging with powders. The boy let them do with him as they would. In his heart, he felt there was no use. Let the white guards tie the Indian, imprison him, surround him with guards night and day. Still, they couldn't hold him. There was provided for him a way of escape. He need not walk or run in it, only yield to the inward voice telling him what to do. Let himself sink. Permit the light of day to close over him, and the prison cell would be left empty above him. He was dimly aware that this evening that something out of the ordinary had happened. He heard the gallop of a horse. Later, sounds of commotion rose from the back porch. Go away, vamoose! He heard his Aunt Kate called. She sounded very cross. Soon Gordy came to bed in excitement. He said Aunt Kate had seen an Indian looking through the kitchen window. The Indian had run like a coward when she went to the door with her broom. True Son lay very still, letting the words sink into his mind. So one of his people was near. Perhaps the long-awaited message had come. At the thought, a lump long, hard, and dried up inside of him melted. A door he had never seen opened in his breast, and the first trickle of life-giving substance came through. Motionless, he waited till Gordy slept in bed beside him. Then he sat up. He felt very weak, but stronger than he expected. The room stretched above him, faintly light with the night. After a while, he put his feet to the floor. His Indian dress, he saw, hung beside his white clothes from a peg. He had not been forgotten by the Great Spirit. Everything had been provided. From time to time he rested on the chair from his small exertions. At last he climbed out of the open window, lowering himself till his moccasins touched the roof tiles of the low kitchen wing. Then he let himself fall and slide like a crumpled ball of spider down to the lap of his mother, the earth. His aunt, the night, with her cool hands, received him. His brother-in-law, the west wind, with his clear breath, revived him. His very old uncle, the moon, shone down upon him. When from the shadow of the barn he looked back, the big white stone house stood like a monster created by the white people, staring after him with one hostile yellow lamplit eye. It was good to look the other way in the soft, endless Indian moonlight, which was never shut up in houses, never having to be bought in white man's posts or lighted in a pot, but free to all the earth and all its creatures. Across a big field of tiny corn, he stopped where the fence row of sassafras trees made a shadow where he could hide. There was no sound save the distant hounds. Into the stillness he threw out the regular spaced notes of the chingacos, the big-eared owl. Utter quiet followed, as if even the dogs listened. After an interval he called again, telling a listener what white men would never notice, that although owls called from near and far in flight, his own calls came from the same place. Still there was silence. He called the third time, and now he added the unmistakable rasping woo-ha of the shakashkagokos, the barred owl, on the end. This time an answer rang so close from across the fence row in front of him that he almost jumped. He guessed that all the time the answer had been moving noiselessly toward him. Aween Kakvek, who are you? He called very low in Delaware. Lenape Nahaki, I am Indian, a guarded voice he was sure he had heard before answered. Aween Kakvek. I am Lenape too. Come out and let me look on you. But the unseen speaker in the fence row did not stir. True Sun moved closer, and still he could see nothing. Lenin Lenape Takum? Delaware, where do you come from? He asked. Otenek Tuscarawas Noom, from the town on the Tuscarawas, the answer came. And now True Sun was sure of the voice. A surge of joy lightened in him. Half Arrow! Ili Kalekalich, do you still breathe? He cried. A bush detached itself from another bush, and in the dim light the two boys rushed toward each other. They embraced and cried out, gripping each other's arms. Half Arrow's fingers were iron. Cousin, I didn't know you. Your voice was like a Yangway's trying to be an Indian. Am I that bad? True Sun muttered. But now with me you will soon talk better, Half Arrow promised. I hope. Let us go to the house. But Half Arrow drew back. Cousin, it is better not to. I don't dare trust the white people. Already I am chased off by your white mother. She called me bad names. She would not like to see me again. It wasn't my white mother, only Puatak, the aunt. You mustn't let the rudeness of white people affect you. They are young and haven't learned yet the hospitality of our Indian houses. If I ask them to, they will feed you. No, I am not hungry. I ate yesterday with Little Crane. Little Crane? True Sun said the name with delight. Does he still breathe? Is he already a papa? And how is his feeling for his young white wife? All the way from the Tuscarawas, he talked of her, but she is still 2 days' journey off. I hope he's not gone to her, so I can still see him, True Sun said. No, he is not gone, and you can see him, Half Arrow promised, but his voice sounded strange. On the way, one ahead of the other, True Sun plied questions, and Half Arrow answered. It was like medicine to hear the familiar boyhood tongue, with the good whistling sound of the Indian consonant, which white people did not have, and to speak without having to set his lips or tongue for the foolish Yangway V and R, which the Lenape did not use. All the way his spirits lifted, so he didn't notice where they were going. Then suddenly he saw they approached Maharg's pasture, and that Half Arrow had stopped speaking and was moving with slowness and caution. Why do you drag? True Sun asked. If you whistle like the crane, then he will answer, unless now he is a papa, he has become deaf. He is deaf enough, Half Arrow answered, moving from tree to tree, where he paused and listened, as if not for a friend but an enemy. At last he halted. I said I would bring you to him. Here he is, he said in a dull voice. Where? I see no one, unless he's a tree. He is something like a tree. Do you see him now? True Sun strained his eyes through the shadows. All the trees he saw bore limbs and leaves. Then slowly he became conscious of a dark mark on the ground. He had taken it for one of the short logs of the white people. That which lies cut like a tree, isn't he? He asked. For answer, Half Arrow ran and knelt at the dark mound. Aye, for the Lenni Lenape, he cried and gave a long Indian moan. True Sun came slowly closer. Even in the dimness, he could make out the design of the familiar match coat Little Crane had worn last fall. It had been spread like a blanket, but the body beneath it neither moved nor spoke. True Sun stared in rigid disbelief. Cousin, it was not sickness that brought him down. No, it was not the sickness. It was not the frightener that white people call the rattlesnake. No, it was not the frightener. As True Sun bent over the body, he felt a terrible hate for the ones who had done this. Could this hard and dried blood on the match coat be the life fluid that only a few hours ago had flowed through Little Crane's veins and had brought him all this distance, but now could carry him no further. Cousin, who did this evil thing? The shots came from behind. When I looked, the butchers were over there behind the trees. Cousin, where were you, and what did you do that white men would shoot after you in peace? We did nothing, and stopped only at 2 places. The first place we asked for you, they sent us to the second place. It was your white uncle, who has men making kegs and barrels. But you were not there. Did you or Little Crane say anything to make him cross? Cousin, before we went in, Little Crane said we must remember that we are guests of the white men. We must be polite. If you look at the skin of a white man, he said, you can see how thin and weak it is. Even such a small thing as words will bruise and cut it open. So we must not remind the white man that he knows very well that his land rightfully belongs to the Indian from whom he stole it. No, we must be happy and tell happy stories. So when we went in, Little Crane was happy and told happy stories. Do you remember any of these happy stories? 2 I remember. They were very funny. Once some Mings stopped with a white missionary overnight and put their horses in a grass field. The white missionary chased their horses out of the field. He said he intended mowing the grass for hay. Then the Mings said, Friend, this field is on Indian land. Then how is it your grass? Oh, yes, it is my grass, the missionary said. I fenced it in. But who grew the grass? You or the Great Spirit? The Ming asked. The Great Spirit grew it, the missionary had to say. Then our horses have a right in it, the Ming said, because we are the Great Spirit's children. Little Crane said you had to laugh at the missionary's face when the Ming put their horses back in and ate up the grass. He was not a real Quaker, but wore a big hat like the Quaker. Little Crane himself had to laugh when he told it. Is there anything so funny, he asked the white man, as a man thinking he owns Indian land as if he fenced it in? True Son stirred uneasily. Cousin, you said there was another story. That was very happy too. It was about a Shawano who owned the white man he gave his trade to. The trader said he must pay up. He daren't even wait for winter, when his pelts of the beaver and fisher fox would be prime. The Shawano asked if the cattle hides taken in the summertime would be good in trade, and the trader said yes, he would salt them down. So the Shawano settled his debt with the cattle hides, and not till the Shawano was gone did the trader find out the hides were from his own cattle. Cousin, it was a very happy story. I heard it told once at home in the village, and the wives had to hold their sides with laughing. True Son stirred again. This was the bold, full-flavored Indian humor he had longed for, but he couldn't laugh tonight. Did the men at my white uncle's laugh? He asked. Cousin, they didn't laugh. When we left your white uncle, Little Crane said to me, the white men are beyond Indian understanding. No matter how happy we talk, they won't laugh with us. Half Arrow lifted the blanket from the body, and True Son saw with horror that his friend had been scalped. His cold, savage rage rose and consumed him. First, let us give Little Crane rest, he said. Then we go to my white uncle and ask him who is the murderer. With Half Arrow's knife and tomahawk, they cut a shallow grave. On the mound they lay branches from bushes with Indian fashion. Weak with exertion and covered with sweat, True Son led the way to the 2-story house with the cooperage behind it. A shed was piled with hoop poles and stacked with new barrels and kegs shining white as skeletons in the moonlight. The cooper shop was dark, but light still showed in the house. True Son knocked, and the short, thick form of Uncle Wilsey came to the door. At the sight of him, the boy's hatred for this man who had slapped him rose, and his voice rose with it. Where's Little Crane? He accused shrilly. His uncle stood stocky and untouched, peering at him. If that's one of the Indians that was here, he said, he won't do any more mischief. He suddenly recognized the caller. So it's you, boy. I thought you were sick and going to die. Does your father know where you're at? I reckon I better keep you till I tell him. His quick, stubby fingers shot out and caught hold of the boy. True Son struggled to free himself, but the powerful, hairy hands easily held him fast. Itchamil! Help me! He gasped, and with a rush, Half Arrow came out of the shadows. He struck with such force that the unprepared man went down. Even so, he was more than a match for the 2 boys. Half rising, he threw Half Arrow back with one hand while he choked the kicking and writhing True Son into submission with the other. Things were going black before the boy's eyes when he saw Half Arrow return with a rush. The good Indian hate was on his face, and a hoop pole swinging in his hands. It struck the heavy head of the white man, who grunted and fell forward. Truson felt his own breath and sight come back as the death grip on his throat relaxed. Quickly, Half Arrow threw down the pole and pulled out his knife. Penao, now watch me cut out this black heart. Mata, no, Truson said with regret. He calls himself my uncle. Then let us skin him like a beast. Ah, it takes too long. Well, anyhow, we will take his hair like he took Little Crane's. Lachi, quick! Half Arrow gave him his tomahawk, and the two set to work together, one cutting and one hacking. At the pain, the heavy white man stirred, groaning loudly, and before they got very far, steps sounded on the floor above them. One of the cooper hands, who boarded with his master, appeared suddenly on the stairs. With an exclamation of dismay, he hurried back. When we are done with this one, we will scalp him too, Half Arrow declared confidently. No, he goes for his gun, Truson said. Xamahalatan, let us run together. Giving up their trophy with regret, the two youths faded into the night. Truson led the shortest way across the fields to his father's farm. The big stone house, the small house, and barn all stood dark. In the pitch blackness of the barn floor, he felt his whispering way to a mow, where he burrowed deep under the hay. From here he brought the mysterious articles that out in the moonlight became a bag of meal, a tow wallet of lead balls, a knife, a horn heavy with powder, his old bearskin, and a long rifle with the brass patch broken off. True! Half Arrow exclaimed with delight at the sight of the rifle. He took it admiringly in his hands. What a pity we did not have this at your white uncle's. Then we could have got his scalp and the other white devil too. Now we could dance around the scalps. We could spit on them and sing revenge for the murder of our brother. Listen, Truson said. Somebody goes for help against us. They could hear plainly the gallop of a horse across the valley. Most of their way to the wall of the first mountain, the sounds followed them of other horses pounding the roads, raising an alarm in Paxton Township.